What's going on, everybody? It's Pelfrey, and I want to do a video on making water and mixing salt water. So if you're new to saltwater tanks or thinking about setting up a saltwater tank and you're in freshwater, it's quite a bit different. With freshwater, you can use some dechlorinator and just use tap water. With saltwater, the water needs to be stripped of all its minerals and whatnot, and the salt has to be added to the water. So the first place we're going to start is at my RODI, my RODI unit. But to kind of what we're looking at here is this is a bucket of RODI water, and this is a bucket of salt. So let's start at the RODI, and then we will backtrack and come to this area. This is a SpectraPure CSP DI90 manual flush system, so 90 gallons per day manual flush. This unit basically connects, I have it set up in my laundry room, and I connect it to the cold line, and what it does is it goes through the different stages and strips the tap water from all of the minerals. So some people use tap water in their saltwater tanks. It's really not recommended. Your best bet is to spend money and get a RODI unit. There's a ton of different brands out there. You don't have to go with something very expensive. I do have a booster pump as well because my pressure coming into the system is quite low. But this is where everything begins, and I have it in my laundry room because it gets too cold here. And the thing to remember is if you keep this outside or in a garage and it gets below freezing in that garage, these canisters can and will crack, and really that's the last thing that you want. So I keep it in my laundry room, and I feed the water into my garage where I store my RODI water. In the garage I have two 40-gallon containers, so 80 gallons total. I do not mix up salt water in these containers. This is just the RODI water that comes out of the unit in my laundry room. They are plumbed together, but that's just for the simple fact that it's just one output here instead of having two outputs down, so it really does nothing. I don't recirculate this water, I don't do anything with it. I fill it up about every 2 months, maybe 3 months, depending on how often I'm doing water changes, which at the moment is not very often. So basically, I run a line from my laundry room. I run this line here from my laundry room into these containers. I got both of these containers off of the Royal King website, and I got the stand, I believe, from Home Depot. So in the summer, this water is hot because it's hot in the garage, and in the winter, this water is really cold. I use this container to fill up my auto top off because it's got the, it's not a 5-gallon bucket, it's very easy to pour. But it's a very simple and easy setup, and it allows me to keep quite a bit of water. My total water volume on my tank is about 65 gallons, so it allows me to keep quite a bit of water on hand for long periods of time. So I use Red Sea Coral Pro Salt, and whenever I get that bucket in from the manufacturer or the third-party retailer or whatever, I actually take it out of that bucket and I use my own Home Depot bucket. The reason being, it is 100% sealed. It's got an O-ring on it. This piece snaps onto the bucket and it will not come off of this bucket. So you can see here, I got about a quarter of a bucket of salt. And what needs to happen here is, even if the bucket was full, you could just roll it around. But it's good to mix up the salt beforehand. Basically, there may be some particulates inside the salt that could settle towards the bottom, and you really just want to get it mixed up before you add it to the water. And I guess that is another key thing here is you actually want to add the salt to the water and not the water to the salt, just for ease of mixing. So in this bucket here, I have an MJ1200 and a heater running. So I put the water in the bucket last night. It's just straight RODI water in the bucket mixing with the heater. And the only reason I'm doing that is I need to heat that water up to the same temperature as my display. I believe it's worth noting that I do not heat up the water that goes in my auto top-off container. I just take it straight from the garage and put it in the auto top-off container. So if it's cold, it'll warm up with it being in the house. If it's hot, it'll cool down whenever it gets into the house. Since I'm not using a lot of that water at any given time, I don't really worry about it too much. Whenever I'm mixing up salt water or just warming the water up, I do run a lid on the bucket. Number one, as you're heating the water up, it will evaporate a little bit. That'll reduce the evaporation. Number two, it will keep the kids out of the bucket. So it's a very simple process, especially if you're using Red Sea salt because it mixes up well. Take the lid off, and this is a half a cup. I know I need about 4 of them. So I'll add salt slowly to the bucket. I'm probably going a little bit too fast, but it's kind of how I do things. I don't necessarily do a level scoop either. There might be a little bit more salt in there, but I should probably write down how much salt to use. Which leads me down to the next thing. You're going to need a refractometer or some way to accurately measure salinity. Your best bet is to add less salt than the manufacturer recommends and test the water. So I'm going to go with 3 half cups and test the water because it's easier to raise the salinity than it is to lower the salinity, especially because I don't have much room in this bucket to add any more RODI water. So I'm going to let that mix for the next 15 minutes maybe, check the salinity, and then add more salt if I need. So using a refractometer is a pretty simple process. Of course, this is what it looks like. It does come with, this one, particular one comes with a screwdriver, so you can make adjustments, which you would remove this piece here and make adjustments. You can use a standard. You can buy some standard to make adjustments to make sure that the refractometer is accurate. That is a good practice. But basically, you're going to need a couple things. You're going to need a refractometer, obviously. Then I use this little guy right here to put a little bit of water on the display. And you're going to need a good light because you're going to have to look in this area at the light. And the good thing is this does turn. So if it's blurry, you can turn it to where it clears up. Unfortunately, as I test this, I'm not going to be able to show you the results because there's just absolutely no way for me to do that. But I'm going to test it real quick and I'll read the results back to you. So stick this little guy in the water, draw out a little bit of water, lay it on top of here, put the rest of the water back into the bucket there. Then you close this little lid, it smashes the water down, and then you look up at the light. So right off the bat, I'm at 1.020. So I know I need to add at least another half a cup. So beforehand, I'm going to take the refractometer and get it clean so that whenever I use it again, I'll have a clean start. And I typically leave it sitting like this just so it could air out. So we will add another half cup of salt. And with the MJ1200, it's a pretty powerful pump, so it mixes up the salt pretty quickly. I don't really want this salt water to sit here very long after it gets mixed. I want to go ahead and get the water changed in the tank so I can just get that process done. So the comment I made a moment ago about being able to raise salinity is going to be easier than lowering it, I made a mistake. And that's fortunately and unfortunately what we do. I'm not going to leave it out of this video because I feel like it's the right thing to do. But to fix the solution, now what I need to do is add some more roti water to the bucket. So the issue is now my salinity in the bucket is at about 1.02728. So it's not going to take a lot of water, but again, it's readily available. All I got to do is turn the knob and I have some more water. Get this added to the bucket, test again. Instead of jumping the gun and adding all of this water at one time, I'm going to add a little bit, let it recirculate, and hopefully that will bring the salinity down. Not too worried about it being at like 1.27 because I run my tank at 2.5, 2.6 anyway. So a little bit of water should mitigate the high salinity, and I should be able to be ready to do my water change. Now that the salt water is mixed up, what I do is I lay a towel on the floor because inevitably water will spill, and I like to try to keep things as clean as possible. So what needs to happen now is there's a couple ways that you can do this. You could siphon the water out. I highly suggest not doing that because you will at some point get a mouthful of water. I've done it before, but I choose not to do it anymore. I actually change water from my sump You can very well change water from your display if you so choose. I just happen to do it from my sump. But what I do is I put the buckets next to one another, so it gives me a pretty good idea on how much water to remove and then also put back into the tank. First thing that I need to do is log into my Apex, and I need to shut off the skimmer, and I'm going to shut off the Neptune Core 20 pump. Everything else I'm going to leave running. Very simple process. What I'm going to do is use the same MJ1200 that I mixed up water with. I'm going to hook it up to this tubing. I'm going to drop it into my sump. And then I use a clamp here so that the hose stays on the bucket. From here, plug in the MJ1200 and let it pull out water from the sump. You know, all in all, this process takes, even mixing the salt, 15, 20, 30 minutes. But the fact that I'm doing a video on it, it has prolonged the process and it takes about an hour. But I really think it's beneficial for some folks to watch the overall process. And I'm going to attempt to get the equal amount of water in this bucket as my new mixed up salt water so that I can have more water. But generally, I don't turn off my auto top off. But generally what I'll do is I'll add more water back to the sump and then I'll just remove it as needed. So now that the bucket's full, pull out the pump. It's going to have water in it, of course, and the hose, which is why I have the tail down. Drop the pump in the new mixed up salt water. Drop the hose in the sump. Clamp it down. Plug in the pump. Pump in the new salt water. So this water, I'm actually going to pump down my drain. I've dumped this water in my yard before and it killed the grass, so I no longer do that. I will pump this water into my sink and be done with it because it was a pain in the butt to get my grass to grow again. So if you have a spot in your yard that you want to kill, dump salt water on it because more than likely it will kill it. And at a certain point, there's going to be still water left in the bucket. Of course, the pump is too big to get all the water out. So what I do, pull the tubing off the sump, just raise the tubing so I can get the water back into my bucket here. Move the pump back into the old water, put the tube in, and I will clamp this down so that it doesn't fall out. And I will dump this water into the sump. And I would rather have more water than not enough. So I do leave this bucket here just in case I need to add more water, but it looks like I should have enough water. So what I'm going to do is go turn the core pump on, and it should start up. Now we're pumping. I'm going to turn it back to auto so that it runs on the percentage that I have selected, and I'll watch the sump level go down. Then from there I will take the blue cup that I have in there and remove water as needed. The new water has had some time to recirculate through the system. Now it is time to turn the skimmer on, and the reason why I'm discussing this is because the skimmer will draw in some water. So it's important to remember that your skimmer is going to use some water. So we're going to slide it to on and then auto, and we'll see if the auto top off comes on, and if it does, that's fine. The last thing left for me to do is I clean off all of my equipment. I just wipe it down. I'm not worried about running it through fresh water or anything, but I wipe it down and get it dried off. I'm just, I guess, meticulous like that. But I would like to have everything cleaned and ready to go so that the next time I need to use a bucket or a piece of equipment, I don't have to worry about, you know, the buckets being froze together or any of the equipment being froze up, because it has been getting into the single digits here. But this is just something that I do anyway. We all know that salt takes a pretty good beating on all of our equipment. So to reduce any problems, and it may not cause any problems, but I just like to kind of keep everything nice and tidy, and I would much rather use the time now to get everything cleaned up versus having to clean it the next time that I need to use it. So inside of this bucket here is fish tank stuff, pumps, heaters, hoses, and whatnot for water changes, 4 buckets in case I need them, and that's that. It's a pretty seamless process, pretty simple process. I don't do water changes that often, so it's not something that I have to go through weekly. It's just probably the first water change that I've done in a month. So with that being said, hopefully this has been beneficial. Hope you've gained something from it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, as always, leave them down below. Don't forget to visit the website, pelfree.net. Like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you all on the next one.